Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Demai Perek Aleph Halacha Gimel. We just came off Agadata, and we're going to resume learning the halachas that we began with this halacha, with Halacha Gimel. We're going to be learning today Daf Tes. We left off on Daf Ches Amud Beis by the two dots, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid, which is actually the beginning of a Braisa. The Braisa will discuss foods that one obtains from an Amma Aretz, with the intention of using them in a mixture. And yes, we had in the Mishnah, Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and the example the Mishnah gave was Shemen Arev. Here, the Braisa is going to add more examples, and indeed, as we paskin like Beis Hillel, in the Braisa we only have the opinion of Beis Hillel that a demai mixture is exempt from all of the demai obligations of tithings. However, the Braisa clarifies that that does not apply when the purchaser, when the chaver bought that demai item in an unmixed state, even though the person bought it with the intent to use it as part of a mixture. There is no exemption, as we'll see. The exemption is only when the chaver bought already a mixture. Taka, some of it in itself would have had the din of demai, but since it's a mixture, and he bought it as the mixture, then and only then is it exempt from demai. Now we're going to quote a machlokes tanoim, which will be really fascinating, and it's going to touch topics that are much broader than demai. We're going to learn foundational rules regarding bittul, when something is batal, when something is not batal. But it's amazing how we get there. There is a machlokes tanoim between Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi regarding a person who's mixing truma into fish sauce, into murios. Now, fish sauce had wine mixed in it. Question is, how do we view, this is the way we will learn the pshat and the machlokes. When a person adds wine to fish sauce, is the kavana, and we're going to follow the majority of the people. So we're going to presume, we're going to have a chazak, that the kavana was only to neutralize the fishy odor, not to add flavor. If that's the case, which is how Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon holds, then using truma in itself is prohibited. Because, we're not allowed to destroy truma. Truma has to be handled with respect. And using, in this case, wine, that's truma, only for the purpose of neutralizing something bad, the negative flavor, is considered, let's say, disrespectful, or it's considered irregular, and therefore it's considered a waste, and therefore it's asur. Rabbeinu HaKadosh holds that the main purpose for adding wine into fish sauce is to add flavor. It's also to take away some fishiness, but it's also to add a positive flavor, and therefore this is something that's permitted. Okay, but from here we're going to jump to the following question: whether that wine became batal or not, whether a non-kohen can consume that fish sauce or not. So listen to the logic. According to Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon, since the fish was not added for flavor, since the wine was not added for flavor, the wine is batal. And since it's batal, a non-kohen, even though the mixture should not have happened, the kohen can consume it. According to Rabbi, the Rebbe says that the wine was added for its taste, for its flavor. In other words, it is a essential part of the sauce. It wasn't only here to take away something negative, and therefore, on one hand, you are allowed to mix it, but on the other hand, the wine will not become batal, and that will be the main reason why we're going to start going into that topic. In other words, bittul has to do with the intent, and behind that, or even before that, even more foundational, is this a product that's intended for consumption? There is where we can say that something might or might not be batal. Masha'enkin, if something is not intended for consumption, for food consumption, then l'kula alma, that wine, you can't say was added for flavor. No one is going to be eating it. A human being won't be eating it. And then l'kula alma, yes, the wine will be batal. And finally, when we're going to be learning about these laws of bittul, we're going to see, yet again, that by avodah zara mitoy raisa, by lo yidbak biyotcha nouma min hachedem, that avodah zara is not batal at all. Now, Kevin is just pointing out over here on the Zoom that, listen, even when you add something for flavor, yes, we have what is more familiar with everyone. The rules of, if it's more than a ratio of 60-1, then the flavor will be batal. If it's less than the ratio, here we're speaking, Kevan, even if the ratio is not going to be nullified in the 60-1. Here we're learning another rule, that if something is lachatchila not added to add the positive flavor, it's only in there in the case of fish to take away the fishy flavor, then we also consider the wine to be batal because it's not there for its positive flavor. Okay, we're going to move on to the next part of the Mishnah Halacha. We're just going back to the Mishnah Halacha Gimel. The Mishnah also mentioned location from where there's a chiyuv of the mai. And guys, we already learned on Daf Aleph from its base in the beginning of the Masechta in the Gemara that even though the Mishnah is speaking about Kaziv, we're going to go back to Kaziv because Ziv Ulamayla, it was not conquered by the oil of Bavel, so therefore it's not imbued with Kedushas Haaretz, and therefore the mai is a product that grows there is exempt from the mai. The emes, it's not only about the mai, it's even about the tevel proper. There's no obligations of tithing outside Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara is not going to focus on that. The Gemara is going to focus on what is the status of Kaziv in itself, and we're going to have various scenarios where a product, even if you're buying it beyond Kaziv, nevertheless, it will be obligated to be tithed. And again, we're going to be following what we can call chazakos, which is, in this case, we're going to follow the majority of a product. How did it get there? Where is it bought? And halachically, the presumption that we will have to make, whether it grew in the Holy Land or whether it grew beyond Kaziv, and therefore it will be exempt. Finally, when we learned in the Mishnah that consecrated items are exempt from the mai, just to remind ourselves, one example, that if an Amaretz separated challah, again, the Amaretz is saying that he tithed everything before separating challah. But nevertheless, I would have to separate the mai. The challah itself has a din of truma. He gives the challah to the kohen. And we already spoke that 1 second, how can b'chal the kohen eat it? Normally, there's another issue with an Amaretz, which is tuma and tara. You're right. So we learned, I think the Marafulda, the Penei Moshe, was speaking about a case where there was a chaver that did the kneading, but the material belonged to the Amaretz. Well, there's no issue of Tum and Tara. So the Mishnah said, just as an example, that is exempt from the Mai. The Kohen can eat it. Question is, why? We'll see in our Gemara, Machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Shaya. I don't know how far we're going to get into it, but that Machlokes will have a nafkamina. At least if we'll open that up, we'll get into the nafkamina. And then we'll continue this topic, God willing, tomorrow at Shavuos. Okay, Chavre, Daf Ches on the base, 3 lines from the bottom. Mixture, right? Shemen, Orei, Machlokes, B'Shama, and Besilo. We pass it like Besilo, a mixture. Part of it is something that is obligated to be tithed. Part of it is, in the case in the Mishnah, spices. Most spices, B'chlal, don't have to be tithed. So if you have a spiced up oil, and the Amaretz is saying he took off the Trumas or Maisis, Besilo, Loimin, and B'chlal, you don't have to take off the money. Says the Brais that other examples, guys, of a mixture. So here you have yayin lemurios. Fish doesn't have to be tithed, right? Fish sauce would regularly have wine in it. Now, this Brais, my friends, is speaking not about the mixture already with the wine. That is where we say, since it's a mixture, you're exempt. You are buying wine, not mixed. Your intention is to put it in murias. Other examples, or v'yayin la aluntis. Now, aluntis is some sort of beverage. The Marafulda says in the second or third to last line, it's a beverage that's made out of mayim, v'yayin, and shemen afarsamayim, balsam oil. So you're planning to put it in a mixture. Kitniyos, legumes, midrabanan. They have to be tithed, but you're buying it to make out of it tchina. In other words, you're going to be missing it. You're going to be crushing it. We know tchina, and you're going to be mixing it with various seasonings. We're speaking about that the seasonings are not obligated to be tithed at all. So in all of these cases, the din is you are chayiv in the mai. That's the point. The point is that even though the purchaser is intending to consume them as part of a mixture, and the Mishnah is telling you Shemen Arev is exempt, that's when you bought it as a mixture. If you bought it unmixed, even though your kavan is very important, for here it won't make a difference. You bought it in an unmixed state, so then you're chayiv to tithe it, ve'ein tzarach leimed, that bevadai, like when the seller informs the buyer, listen, my friend, I'm selling it to you, but I have a chal and take of trumas or meises. There's nothing to talk about that you have to tithe it, and we're gonna, like we already mentioned in the intro, we'll see in a moment whether that's l'kula alma bayayin lemurias, whether it's bottle or not. Okay. Furthermore, however, in contrast, like we learned in the Mishnah, that hey, Natsman, if you didn't buy yayin lemurias, if you bought from the Amoaretz the murias that already has wine in it, you bought aluntis that already has his wine in it, you bought the tchina mixture that has legumes, that has tchina in it, v'chulei, and a chanami, we're making it clear, like we learned in the Mishnah spoke about Shemen Arev, they are exempt. But the reason why the Braisa says otherwise in the Reisha, because you bought it in an unmixed state. Gewalt. Okay. Now, the Havamin of the Gemara, just to appreciate where we're coming from, and we'll clarify this right now, is that now that we said that Yayin Lemurias Chayev B'Demai, only Hein Atzman, when you bought them, they are exempt. The Havamin of the Gemara now is because it became bottle. Because it became bottle. And yeah, correct. Like Kevin pointed out, we are already familiar when it comes to bittul. There is a certain ratio that's needed for bittul that we are all familiar with. And just to quickly chazit, that midoy raisa, bittul beroif, even by macholas asuris, midoy raisa, right? Then we have the concept of tam. And for the tam, now, by the way, tam ki ikir is also really a machloikis, whether tam ki ikir is midoraisa or midoraban. So I take that back. But the beikir itself, when there's no mixture of taste, that's l'kula alma batal beroif. When there is a mixture of taste, which would happen if you cook things together, when things are soaked together, when things are spiced up together, when there is an imparting of flavor, so then you have to have kirais and tam. Did it impart the taste? Chazal estimated, even in Shulchan Aruch, it says, give it to a baker, give it to a goyish person who can taste it. But if you don't have that option, then we go by the ratio of 60 to 1. And what we're going to learn over here is aside of the norm, 60 to 1 ratio for bittul to take effect, kavana will have a big part. And as we mentioned, just to quickly chazir, that there is this machlokes Tanoim, Rav Elazar, Rav Shimon, and Rabbi. No, it's not about bittul. It begins about a whole different topic, which is that a kohen who gets truma to choira has to behave with it in a respectable manner, which means to use it for that which it is intended to be used for, which is to eat. So to use shemen that's tar, for example, even for fuel, is something that's awesome. Now, if it becomes tamei, that's exactly what we do with it. Whereas I cannot use truma in an irregular manner. It's considered disrespectful. That's really the topic of the machlokes. And the question is, can you add wine into this fishy sauce? And people who understand a little bit about food, fish is great and fish is terrible because it's fishy. I know today people add lemon. They always give you a lemon. The purpose of the lemon is not to give the time of lemon, even though you like the lemon. The ikar reason, I'm just my own mushal, is to take away the fishiness. So when people would add the wine in the aluntis, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon holds that, again, this is a machlokes in mitzias, you can say that way, it's how do you view it? He holds that the main purpose is to take away a bad taste, to take away the fishy taste. And therefore he considers this something irregular. You're not eating it, even though you will be eating it. And therefore it's awesome. He's not even talking about bittul. Rabbi holds no. Rabbi holds that they would add wine into the fish sauce, not only to take away something negative, but also to add the geschmackheit, the tastiness of wine, and therefore it's 100% motive. And step number 2, that our Gemara is going to extrapolate that according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, that holds that you're not allowed to add wine. If you did it, since your kavanah was not to add taste, we don't follow the normal rules. Does it have the taste of wine or not? I don't care. It's not there for its positive taste, and therefore it's batel. And I'm presuming that the amount of wine that was added into fish sauce was not batal b'shishim. So the only reason why it would be batal is because if we're going to take a hold that you added it to take away the fishy taste, so therefore it's batal. So the question now will be: does the Braisa Yain Lemurias hold only like a Rablaza Rab Shimon? Ma anon kaimen. If the Braisa follows the sheet of Rabbi holds that you are allowed to mix it. And now we are building from that. Why does Rabbi say you are allowed to mix it? Because you're adding it l'tamai. And since you're adding it l'tamai, you can't tell me that it's batal. If people added it for its taste, they made sure the ratio worked. In other words, it's not batal. So first of all, why would we say that if you bought it already in a mixed state from the Amoritz, why would it not be chayvig? And the havamina is that the mai mixture doesn't have to be tied because it's batal. No, I feel a bit the mai, right? Even if you bought it when it's already mixed, you chayav. And if the Braisa follows the shita of Rab Elazar ben Rab Shimon, that the Gemara is already taking as a given that he will hold that taka. He says you're not allowed to mix it, but because you're not doing it for the flavor, and since you're not doing it for the flavor, even if it has a flavor, you didn't do it for the flavor. Right? Well, and therefore it's batal. If it's batal, then it's not a din of the mai. Then even if the Amoritz mixed in tebel mamish, he shouldn't have done it. But once you did it, it's batal now. Then I feel about it. You put him, Gavaldik. And the Gemara is going to answer. This is the opportunity to clarify that the rule that we had of Shitas Beisil, the rule that we have in the Braisa, that if you buy it already in a mixed state, the reason why we are saying that you are exempt is not because of din bittul. It's nothing to do with it. It's really we follow like Rabbi. From Rabbi we extrapolate that yayin and murias is for flavor, so it's not bottle. It's taka not bottle within a bittul. Okay, Ella Kirebi. Anan Amrin, the shot over here, therefore, is Bekalin Shekilu B'Dmai, just like we began this whole Masechta, right? That we said that there are certain scenarios, the whole Dmai is Midrabanan. The whole Dmai is Midrabanan. Lechatchila, the Rabbanan did not enact the din of Dmai in certain scenarios. So by a mixture, Lechatchila didn't make the din of Dmai. Has nothing to do with Dinei Bitol. Givaldik. Okay. Now let's go back to more examples in contrast to the Mishnah, Shem and Arev, that we have mixtures. Kilur is some sort of paste that people would put on top of their eye whenever there was an infection. So sometimes you had this cosmetic purpose that we have a lot in Masechta Shabbos and many other places. And then there's also medicinal purpose. We had this also for the foreign Shabbos. And part of this kiloid, part of this paste was they added wine. So yayin likilor, that's your kavana, but you bought the wine, same concept. Kemach, you want to make another type of plaster. Again, you will be using it, again, not for consumption. So we're going to say, so 1 second, so now it's a good trick. So now you're going to say, well, what did we learn in the Braisa? That if you bought it prior to the mixture, you're chayiv. Says the Braisa, you still potter. Why you potter? Because what did we learn in the Mishnah? What was the first rule of the Mishnah? To go back, it's over last week. The Mishnah began telling us that one of the other exemptions for the mai is that if I bought it for non-consumption purpose. So even though it's not, in other words, you can't be mated it because it's going to be put into the kilo, because right now you bought it unmixed, but you will still be exempt because there's another purpose. You're not planning to consume it. What's in the first cases of the Braisa was murias I'm planning to consume. The only heter is because I bought it, if I bought it as a mixture. Same thing with the other examples, tchina. Here, there's another heter. For the other heter, I don't care that it's not mixed because it's the gavaldik. Okay. However, okay. This whole heter, even when you buy something for not food purposes, just to remember, if it's tevel, then you have to be mafresh trumas umaisis.
Why are they chayav for it?
What was that?
Why are they chayav for it? Chayav b'davai.
That's the rule, that any item that you grew,
I get it, but you bought it for non-consumer.
Doesn't matter. That's the purpose. This whole heter that if you buy something, you bought it, you didn't grow it. The guy, one second, Vlad, I'm going to take a step back. Something that's not for oichel is exempt from ultramasomaisis. The person grew it for oichel. You're buying it to put it into your kilo.
Right.
So when do we say in the Mishnah that since you're buying it lekila, you're buying it for non-consumption purposes, you are exempt only demai, only if the issue is only demai. If the issue is that the guy that's selling it, whether he's a chaver or an amaretz, is telling you, I did not separate any tromosomaisis, he grew it as oichel. That means at the time of the chiyuv, which is, let's say, the meruach, there was a chalois chiyuv maisris on it because it was going to be eaten. Just because you later buy it doesn't help. Like all of the other hetadim, you're mafkid it. Once the chiyuv was chal, you can't get rid of the chiyuv. However, by demai is different. Demai is the chiddush. Now, says the Brais another thing. Let's go back to Yain Lekilur. When we said that Chayavim Bevadai, that's when they are not mixed. But what happens if you have Yain Lekilur and the guy is moided that the wine that he put into the killer, he did not hide at all? Hey, even though they contain definite tevel. No, even if someone grew it to eat it, and this guy later decided to put it into this medicinal eye salve, the din will be, since it was mixed in it, now we have to go to dinei bittul. Will it be chayiv? So we can learn that the Braisa says, hey, natzman, but the mixture, the yayin itself, before you mix it into the killer, is chayiv bevadai. Even though you bought it lekilor, but it was grown to be consumed. But if the guy went ahead and he already mixed it and he sold it to you, then it's going to be exempt. The question is why? So it says the Gemara, hocha at omar, that if you mixed vadai tevel into kiloi, turim and havadai, and over here, by the first cases, by the fish sauce, by the aluntis, turim and adamai, and now taka we can go to the din bittul. So there is now finally the aspect of bittul. And again, we're passing like Rabbi to make it very clear. Okay, so kan afal gav gufay hu bato al gav gufay hu bato the kan kivin shu noislai hu bato. In other words, your kavana will affect whether it's batal or not. And we're following Rabbi. When you're putting something in your eye, it's going to be batal. When did we say that Rabbi holds? When did that? What we said that Rabbi holds that that a kohen that you are allowed to put the wine into the murias. Why? Because Rabbi holds most people put it for the flavor, and therefore Rabbi holds it's not batal. This is only shayach if you plan to consume it. The moment something is for non-consumption, then even according to Rabbi, it's going to be batal. You didn't put it there for its flavor, even though it's a component of the medicine, but it's going to be batal. Let's go back to the din Torah. It's batal b'roiv. Why would it not be batal? Because it's because you can taste it. If it's something non-consumption, then I don't care if there is the tam of yainin. You never put it there for the gaval, for the taste. Here again, your kavanah will make a big effect. Something that's made for consumption, since that's the kavanah over here, then it will not be batal.
Why by cooking do we say batal b'shishim?
No, batal b'shishim is taka because it's batal b'shishim. That's what Kevin pointed out from the beginning. That even if something was made for consumption, there is a certain point where it's not lois and tam. If it's not lois and tam, then it's batal.
Fell in the by accident. I put it in there for time.
If you put it in by time, it won't be batal. That's why spices won't be batal. You have to be a chef. If someone is putting something in and they know what they're doing, it will not be batal. If not, they'll put in more. Masha Enken in the salve, even if someone were to taste it, if they would taste the yayin, since it was made for non-consumption, I don't care what it tastes like. Once it's mixed, it's batal. And since it's batal, Gewaltig. Hein atzman pturim in avadai. Gewaltig. Okay. Bottom line is what we're saying, that yayin lekilur is mamish batal. Once you did it, right? Like even tavel. Okay. 1 second, there's a problem. Problem is avodah zarah. Raisa tells us that if a person used, which obviously the wine was yayin nesach, that kilul should avodah zarah is asur b'hano. Question is why? Why? You just said that when you have an issue of an isur doiraisa, if it's being put into a mixture and it's for non-food consumption, even if there might be the tam there, since it's not for consumption, we're going to go by the basic rule of bittul. It's batul b'roif. So why is it that if there's a little bit of yayin nesach wine, if it's lekiloid, not murias, it's for non-food consumption, then bittul should go into effect. So the Gemara says, you're right, bittul goes into effect, but not by avodah zarah. That's the whole thing. Avodah zarah is asad even b'mashal. That's the unique chumrah of avodah zarah. Shanyehi, because it says, and here we're quoting a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh, lo yidbak b'yodcha mu'uma min ha'chedim. The word mu'uma, as you can see, is superfluous. Hashem could have said, lo yidbak b'yodcha min ha'chedim. We go into the Holy Land. Moshe Rabbeinu was telling us that the goyim had a lot of getchkalach. Don't take anything. What's the me'uma? That even the most minute amount is problematic. And avodah zarah is not batal, never batal. The last maharafulda. Shanya hi mishum chumrat avodah zarah. The oiser b'chal shehu kidich siv liyidbak b'yotchum menachedem. There ain't sham bittul, because the mikol makim kol shehu miyas ikar. There is emphasis there. Elo the b'shari surim. Batal mashenkin b'avodah zarah. Okay. Says the Gemara, we're not done yet. One more little layer over here. You're telling me that yayin nesach will never be batal. So ma beinam l'shmarim shel goy. Shmarim is when you make wine, and people would use those grapes again and again and again, and at some point that's when you start making temed. And the halacha is that even after the wine was made, nevertheless, shmarim of goy remain asur. What's the kasha we just said? Avodah zarah is never batal. Ilu shmarim shel goy shema einam asurim ba'noya. Of course not. Nevertheless, the law is that shmarim, one sheyafshu ein bohem mishum hanoas avodah zarah. And the question is, why? Why is it that the rule is that if they have sediment that's completely dried out, there, from that point, it's mutter? Did you not tell me that it's asad afilu b'mashahu? And this is a great example where it sounds like the Gemara is asking a question, which it is, and the Gemara is not giving an answer, but that's the way the Yerushalmi spoke. But we're going to read the Maraful. It's a very important Maraful. That mashahu is problem. There is a point where there isn't even mashahu. And the Gemara really is asking it the signal of Akasha, but the way the Marafulta says, the Gemara doesn't even find it necessary to give an answer. We want to make sure that even when we're so machna by avodah zarah, it doesn't mean that there'll never be a line after which we say that there is absolutely nothing problematic anymore. Let's read on top the top Marafulta. That we know that shmarim of a goy is asur ba'ana. And bafilo hachet kaimelon, we're not even debating that. It's given. We know that shmarim sheyafshu inami sheyashenu, that if they get very old, what does very old means? In kashrus, we know this a full year. Garsinan shenesyashnu, that they are old a year, and therefore v'nesyapshu, they are dried out. V'hainu la'achshem asur chodesh ein b'hem mishum hanos avodah zarah. Ein v'chein kosav Rambam zal imacholas asuros based on a mishnah avodah zarah hachartzanim v'hazagim isurim yisraelim. Nevertheless, v'rabbanon hitiru b'yavation shekfar nisbatel lachluchias hayayin shemahen v'lokach hiksha shas ma'ishna doloi machminim mishum chumram da'avodah zarah da'asur b'chol shu. And even though says the Marafulda that below mishani al zeklum, you know why the Gemara doesn't give an answer? Because it's a question that was not meant to be a question. The ena kushya, because the hasam since la'achar shneim asur chodesh afilu kol shuhu leke shekfar nisyabish kol halachluchias hayayin shebahen. Mashe'en kain, if you add the yayin lekiru, if yayin is of avodah zarah, even though it's not made for consumption purposes, but it's there. In other words, but at some point there's nothing left. And it's time to know that we already spoke it up many times, and many people halacha l'maisa rely on it when it comes to Belias, right? Which to begin with is already very weak. And you have a nice and tam gam, but it's always going to be good. I'm so careful, let's say by Pesach. And now what happens if I have a ceramic thing, a guy, or for kashrus, a person yarshans from their grandmother who wasn't kosher, didn't eat kosher, a very sentimental or valuable set of chinaware. What do you do with that? So, we rely, Moshe says that after 12 months you can use it. Even lechatchila, because there's nothing there. That's it. It's always ketrukim. There's no tam. It's not lois and tam levgam. The tam to begin with is something that you have to put your head around.
Same concept by davening with animal dung.
With what?
Animal, like excrement.
Davening?
Yeah, if you can't daven if there's...
if there's no smell. Once there's no smell, it's very good. It's not soya anymore. Okay, very good. Okay, Atkan. It's good to shtickle just to get it that in Yerushalmi there are many times you have kashas, and don't think that a kasha means it's unanswered. He says it's a question that's left unanswered because it's not a kasha. It's the way they would speak. They would just point out, Asr b'chol shehu. Yeah, what about shumarim that after 12 months you can use? In other words, I accept, but even by avodah zarah, there comes a point where there's nothing there, and it's not a problem, and you can buy shumarim of a goy and have hana from it. Okay, weiter. The Mishnah spoke about location. Again, we mentioned, even though the Mishnah is speaking about the Mai, so it's in the context of the Mai, but it's not about the Mai. This is really about the obligation of tithing, which is only it's a mitzvah hatluya ba'aretz. And the way the Rambam words it, that the first conquest of the Holy Land under the leadership of Yehoshua, the halachic mechanism that was used to imbue the land with holiness, aside of it already being holy, but we needed to be magdish the land, was through kibush. And the weakness of kibush is that if goyim, which is tragically what happened, countered kibush, then the kedusha that we put in was removed because of the goyim. Oil Bavel, when they resettled the land, the koyach of doing things b'shalom, whenever there's such an opportunity, since it was not through the kibush, it was done through chazaka of settling the land. Settling the land is a much more powerful instrument. And even when we were exiled, the Rambam paskins that the kedusha sheniya is kitcha l'shaita v'kitcha la'asad. True mikaziv and further was an area in which Yeshua and our grandparents conquered and settled. It's part of the biblical Holy Land, Eretz Yisrael. Abed, when Oil Bubble went back up, they didn't settle every place. Now, Kiziv Machlekes Rishonim. Either the boundary of in Yerushalmi, it's with a gimel, Giziv, Hefker, with a fei, with a beis. Here in the Babli, it's written with a chaf. So, but we're learning Yerushalmi. So, Giziv is either the northern boundary. So Kiziv, Ulahalon means when you go further north, and interestingly, many place Kiziv, I know you don't freak out, on the west. Normally people think Eretz Yisrael, the western boundary is the only boundary that I know. It's the Mediterranean Sea, Amachai. Interestingly, that on some place in the north, according to some Bishayim, when we resettled the land, there was still a little strip of beach, I don't know how much land, which is to the west of this city, which we did not resettle, which means that that chutz la'aretz, if you go from the other perspective, if you're on top, wherever the top is, when you go downwards, you can actually go on the beach and still be chutz la'aretz. So Kiziv will be the boundary from which we say that from Kiziv and the east, from Kiziv and east, is no longer Eretz Yisrael. And west as well. But let's just go, Kiziv is a northern boundary, and the Mishnah said, which even also means from Vadai, but the Mishnah did not clarify what's the status of Kiziv itself. It's not clear. So the Gemara clarifies. Kiziv Atzma Mayi answers the Gemara, yeah, we don't know from the Mishnah. Actually, the Mishnah, it sounds like Kiziv Ulahalon, but finally we learned in the Braisa that even Kiziv Atzma is also Patim in Adamai. So it's that town was not settled by Yoel Babel, and therefore there is no chiyuv to tithe produce that grows in it. Also to know that even though the chiyuv of Trumas U'Maasros is only on produce of Eretz Yisrael, there were two steps. I remember correctly in the Rambam, there were two steps of gezeres in which midrabanan certain countries around Eretz Yisrael have to be tithe. If I'm not mistaken, the first one goes on Eretz Shinar, if I'm not mistaken, which was a more or less bubble. And then there was another takana, all in the times of the Tanoim, maybe Nevi'im, I have to remember, Nevi'im and the Tanoim, or something like that, in which Syria, which is only Kibush Yachid, and Kibush Yachid, Lavshmei Kibush, Midoy Raisa, and Mitzrayim. So there are other lands around Israel that the Chachamim made a takana midrabanan for them to be tithe, but it doesn't go from Uksiv Olamayim. So Olamayim is complete, and Kaziv Atzma is also exempted. Now, some details about when you buy produce in a location. How do you know where it comes from? You don't know where it comes from. So you have to rely on certain halachic chazakas to know where it came from. And accordingly, are you chayiv to tithe it or are you not chayiv to tithe it? So he gives an example. Guys, tzoid, right, Tyre is more distant from Eretz Yisrael, and Sidon is closer to Eretz Yisrael. Once you have that, you'll have what the Braisa is saying. So tzoid is even further. On the other hand, when you have a caravan of truckers that come into a city, you know it didn't grow here. The truckers there was hachameres. Hachameres doesn't mean one genius with a donkey. Chameres means a caravan of people with donkeys that were schlepping produce from one location to the other. Even though you're buying it in Tzoid, Tzoid is even more distant than Sidon. There you have to presume that the produce that they brought on their donkeys came from the Holy Land, which means you have to tithe. And certainly, if there would be a chameres and sidon, the chiddush of the Braisa is not certainly. Let me take that out. I take that back. Megoides means warehouses. You don't know how it got there, but some people have little markets and some people have large quantities, wholesale of produce. That in Sidon, now Sidon is closer to Eretz Yisrael. Min hamigoides, but Sidon in both of these scenarios, you're chayiv. Because halacha says that we have to presume that whatever came, that we're speaking about produce, came from Eretz Yisrael, implies the Gemara. What happens if you buy min hamigoides b'tzoid? If there are warehouses in Tzoid, you don't know whether it came there on donkeys. You don't know how it got there. We don't have that chazaka. And here the chiddush is, even if you're getting it from a chameres b'tzidoin, you would think chameres doesn't matter. Pater, I'll tell you why. Because that's what we're saying over here. That in Sidon, at least when the Braisa was written, people there wouldn't only import produce from the Holy Land. They would import produce, who knows from where, from Turkey, from other places. In other words, this is really time and location. You have to know how people transport it. You have to know, we follow Roy. That's the way I understand it. And when the Braisa was written, that's the way it worked. Another detail, that when we said that the chameres b'tzoid, like we mentioned, is that the produce is being brought in large quantities on many, many, many donkeys. But mechamoir yechidi b'tzoid zakmanish, you're not going to be chayiv. Look inside the 5 lines, a couple of lines under the Gemara. I think 5 or 6 lines under the Gemara in the beginning of the line. That mechamoir yechidi b'tzoid claim it. Mechamoir yechidi. Why? Because we say the Talinan, the Misadois Soid Atzmahi, it came from that locality. One donkey, many donkeys, no one gets many donkeys to bring produce that come locally. Some of it is common sense. Okay. Weiter says the Gemara. So we just said that what? We just
from start to Sidon, there was not donkeys taking stuff back.
Oh, so really, the Gemara is going to touch on what you're asking. We said chameres b'tzoid is going to be chayiv. What happens if there's a whole caravan of donkeys, but we don't know where they came from. We know that they went through Kziv. The Mishnah said Mikziv ulahalan pater. We already established from a Braisa Kziv itself is also exempt. Chameres, if the chameres would come into Tzoid without knowing any information, you would say chayiv. What happens? Chameres shenichnas al Tzoid derech Kziv. What's going to be the that what will be the din? The Mara folded the first white line under the Gemara. Boy, that's the question. That's Danny what you were saying. Just the Hoyul Kziv is Makaim Pturu, the Haksiv Kziv Kelochutzi, as we just established. We know that these chevra of donkey drivers, of truckers, nichnes l'sham, and indeed, if they would have pirkua l'sham, if they would have unloaded over there, we would have said ptura at that moment. So hashta sheyatzes misham l'tzoyin chayeves oloi. Does where it went through have a halachic effect or not? Guys, look inside the Gemara. So asa chami, you already had this a few times, right? Tashema, come and see that ilo amdala b'kziv ptura. So the Gemara is saying logically, hashta shenichnas l'tzoyin chayeves. Of course not. Of course not. Wherever you travel through has an effect on you, right? In Chassidus, you have derech ma'aviv, derech hislapshus. It's derech hislapshus. In other words, when you travel through a location in our life, every journey, every masa has a big effect on you. And once the status changed, it remains changed. In this case, even l'kulam. Now, the final clause of the Mishnah. I know it's late. Let's just open up the topic. The final case of the Mishnah was consecrated items are exempt from Damai. The first example of the Mishnah was Chalas Ha'Ma'aretz, as we explained out today in the intro. Let me just go through the other ones. Meduma was that the Ha'Ma'aretz had what he claimed was Truma Gedoyla. What the Ha'Ma'aretz claimed was Mamish Chulin. According to him, it's Chulin Legamri, perfectly tight. And Truma got mixed into the Chulin. And you didn't have the ratio of 100 to 1. And the din is that Taka, you don't say the whole thing becomes Truma. So now you have 50 apples. One of them is Truma. One apple has to be gifted to a coin. The other apples it could be sold, but it can only be sold to a coin because as far as you know, he has to pay. He'll pay less money, and now the coin bought it. So the chiddush is aside of that mixture, you don't on top of it now have to separate them out. Something that's mixed, and even though you have to be noyeg, you have to sell it for the cheaper price and only to be consumed by a coin. But the kohen doesn't have to separate the mai. The next case was food that you purchased with the may ma'aser sheni. That's the hardest one. Shi'ar menachas was easy. Shi'ar menachas again is kachim. Amma Aretz came ahead. He brought his own flour to the Beis Hamikdash, from which a carbon mincha was offered. Kemitzah is burnt on the mizbeach, and the shirayim is eaten to the kahana. Problem is, do the Kahanim have to take off the mind? No, they don't. No, it's Chalas Ha'Ma'aretz and Meduma. There's Kedusha involved here. Shirayim. Now, the one case of the Mishnah is not connected to holiness. Is that money, even of Ma'aser Sheni Vadai, we said. Ha'Ma'aretz has Ma'aser Sheni. He's saying he separated the Ma'aser. So he has Ma'aser Sheni Vadai. He goes into Yerushalmi and HaKodesh and he buys produce. That produce, even if it's bought from an Ha'Ma'aretz, is exempted from the mine. It's all produce that's bought from the monies of Ma'aser Sheni was never included in the takon of the mine. That is the cases that we learned in the Mishnah. And now we have, again, the Machlokes. Let's just open the Machlokes, understanding why. Machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shai. So Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, the first approach is Bishah shegazru al hadmai. It's not because we assume the Ha'Ma'aretz tithed it. No. We assume that the Chachamim did not want to burden Kohanim. The Chachamim did not want for people who come to Yerushalayim and are going to buy produce to be limited from whom they can buy produce. In other words, if I would have to separate the mai every time I buy in Yerushalayim produce, then I'm not going to buy it from the Ha'Ma'aretz, and that will diminish the quantity of product in Yerushalayim available for the people. In order for people to feel the harchava, that's the word. In other words, lechatchila they didn't put the gezerah, hakalan shedamai, or like we learned today, a mixture. Why not? Not because we trust that he removed it. Lechatchila, they didn't make the gezerah on these cases. That's Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Shai doesn't have that approach. Rabbi Shai holds that they were not exempted lechatchila. And nor was then emas kachim olav. that since now I know that this doesn't go to Ma'aser Sheni. That has to be explained, okay? But aside of the case of Ma'aser Sheni, the other three cases, Chala, Mincha, we're speaking of Truma Gedoyla mixed already. That because the Amoritz understands we're dealing with a mixture of Truma Gedoyla, or we're dealing about the Kachim, he will go the extra mile and he will remove it. It's not that Lechatchila they didn't put the Gezerah, but here we are trusting the Amoritz more. It's a big nafkamina. That's the sheet of Rabbi Shai. Now, how does that fit? How does that fit with Ma'aser Sheni? So let's look inside. How does that fit with Ma'aser Sheni? So that Rashi Ilyo explains it. No, this has to be explained. Look inside the Rashi Ilyo, 5 lines on the left side from the bottom, in the middle. Behind Utama, the Lekuach bekesev Ma'aser, the Kivin, the Oimer Loishamachalal Kedushas Hakesev Bepeiros. In other words, there is a Kedusha part of it. Ma'aser Sheni is holy. You are taking Ma'aser Sheni money and you're buying produce. And those produce is not bona fide chulin. That becomes Ma'aser Sheni. It can only be eaten in Yerushalmi. Ma'aser Sheni can only be eaten in Betano. So there is a Kedusha aspect. Same thing in other words. Since the person, the Amoritz who's selling the produce in Yerushalmi, knows that this is Ma'aser Sheni, there's more Kedusha. Misyore, he has more reverence than Noisan Loidavar Misukan.
When is he not reverence, but there is a case of buying by him?
When there's no kedusha involved. Pashit. In other words, I'm anywhere in Eretz Yisrael, even in Yerushalayim, there's no kedusha's Ma'aser Sheni. I'm buying chulin from an Amoritz. The Amoritz is telling me he took over the Trumas Ma'aser because of their a little bit of ignorance, a little bit of not taking it that seriously. Chachamim says some of them might not have removed all of it. You can't trust them fully, and you have to remove the remainder. In other words, is it because we trust him, or is it because it was not made on? That's the machlokes Rabbi and Rabbi Shai.